Histology of muscle tissue. There's 4 types of tissue in the body: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Now we get into muscle tissue. There's 3 types of muscle: smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. That's it. So muscle is a little bit simpler than the other types of tissue because when we covered epithelial tissue, we talked about a number of the shapes and the layers. When we get into connective tissue, now we move away from, remember, cellularity, and we look at they make a matrix because the cells become more specialized, so they're producing a product. Now we go back to we look at muscle, that it's more cellularity, that the cells are bunched more closer together. The reason why it gives us that tensile strength like a rope. When you think about a rope and all the twines that are mixed together, when you pull on the rope, it gives me the strength based on the way those cells are organized. And in fact, we call muscle cells myofibers, muscle fibers, muscle cells, but we refer to them as fibers just based on the way it has that rope structure to it. But not to be confused when we say connective tissue makes a matrix. The matrix includes connective tissue fibers, collagen, elastin, reticular. None of that. We're done with all that. Muscles is just cells put together. When we look at the 3, this is cardiac, this is skeletal, this is smooth, and it's based on a lot of the appearance when we look at smooth, but we'll start with cardiac tissue. So this is cardiac muscle. The way I recognize this as cardiac is these small little structures here, but they're dark lines that run across the cell. So I can tell from one muscle fiber, a myofiber muscle cell, one to the next based on seeing these intercalated discs. So these dark lines are intercalated discs. Skeletal muscle and smooth muscle don't have these. These intercalated discs are the boundaries between each cell, and they help for the communication and movement of materials from cell to cell. If you remember our types of cellular attachments or cellular junctions, one of them is gap junctions. So built within these intercalated discs are gap junction. It allows that communication of moving materials because my heart's got to beat 3 billion times over my lifetime if I live long enough. The other thing we'll see is the dark dots are nuclei, indicating that I have more than one nuclei in some parts of the cell. So cardiac cells can be multinucleated. So 2 things that you recognize that are different for cardiac tissue are these intercalated discs, and you tend to see more nuclei in between. So these are all just cells that are wrapped together, and you see a little bit more cellularity between the cells. When I move over to skeletal muscle, now I see a lot of railroad tracks, and those are striations. So cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle have what we call striations. If I went on a higher magnification, there are a couple spots where you can see these lines running across up and down. And if I look at skeletal, you can see they're more prominent striations. And striations are these railroad tracks that are running across. We call those A bands and I bands. And if you look at it, these lines go dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. It's referring to the protein filaments, that we have actin and myosin, and these protein filaments allow for movement. And when we shorten the protein filaments, these actin and myosin, they shorten the cell, shorten the tissue, you shorten the muscle. And they're in all 3 types. It's just when we look at skeletal, you have more prominent striations when we look at the organization of the myofilaments, actin and myosin. So the A bands are dark. The letter A is in the word dark. The I bands are light. The letter I is in light. And so it's the way these are organized that give us that structural piece to each cell. So this is one myofiber. So in this slide, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, roughly 7 cells that are all densely packed together. When we get to the types of connective tissue that wrap it, there's a sheath of tissue that's connective tissue that's called the endomysium. Endomysium wraps around the muscle cell. So as I look at these striations, that's indicative of skeletal muscle. When I move over to smooth, smooth has a smooth appearance to it. It still has actin and myosin. It just doesn't have those railroad tracks like I see in skeletal muscle and cardiac. So that's hence the reason why we call it smooth. It's actually more like when you look at a barbershop pole and when you see it spinning and you see the red and the blue and the white of the barbershop pole and the way it's curling like that, almost like a coil. That's what's happening in smooth muscle. So when I look at smooth muscle, it's almost like when we looked at dense regular. I took a nice paintbrush stroke and just ran it across the slide. So the dark dots are indicating the nuclei of the cells. So these are all just smooth muscle cells that are all pieced together, and we see again more of that cellularity. Now, where do we see this type of tissue? When we look at skeletal muscle, it's everywhere I can control and move my muscles, right? So where I have voluntary control. Smooth muscle areas where I'm moving something, but I don't have control over it. So one example is in the middle of a blood vessel, tunica media, is showing that I have smooth muscle. As I push the blood through my arteries, it's got to pump a lot with elastic fibers, but smooth muscle. I can't control what it's going to do. I can run around, speed it up, say with my heart, I can run and speed it up, but I can't tell exactly how much it's going to push blood throughout my body. I also see it primarily in the digestive tract. So your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. We're moving things across your tube that we go through the digestive tract. That's all smooth muscle that's lining the inside of it. So I have three types of tissue when it comes to muscle: cardiac, skeletal, and smooth.